Hey writer, if you're ready to level up, then buckle up. Get your pen and paper ready. It's time for another episode of the Art and Business of Writing podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Art and Business of Writing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, where today I am joined by Peter Cox. Peter Cox is a best-selling author of more than 20 books and is the managing director of Redhammer Management, a London-based literary agent recognized by the Association of Authors Agents. Redhammer specializes in managing a small number of exceptional authors, working closely with them at every stage of the journey from monitoring and supporting publishers' performance to aggressively selling film, television, and other rights. In this episode, Peter and I have a really candid discussion about the role of authors and agents working together, as well as agents and publishers. Here are some of the things that you're going to learn on this episode today. 1, you're going to learn about Peter's work as a literary agent and how he got started. 2, the relationship between agents and author and why his agency is different than most. 3, why every author should work with a literary agent, whether in his country or not. 4, how to query an agent and what really captures their attention in a query letter and in a proposal. 5, how agents choose authors to represent. 6, what makes an author platform and why it matters to agents. 7, the most important aspect of your book proposal. 8, how agents shop books and how publishers and agents work together to sell books. Basically, we're going to be talking about the relationship between publisher and agent and what the publisher expects from the agent, and then how that translates to what the agent will expect from the author. Then 9, the financial side of traditional publishing for authors and agents and whether self-publishing may not be the more lucrative route for you. And 10, how to send Peter your query and how to join his group and his tribe at online. So hopefully you'll enjoy the show. There's a lot to unpack. It's going to be a great hour and 30 minutes. It's probably the longest episode I've ever done, but I really wanted to take time to make sure that you got this opportunity to hear directly from a literary agent all the things you need to know as you prepare your book proposal, your query, and everything that goes with getting yourself a traditional book deal. So without further ado, this is Peter Cox. Hey, Peter, welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be with you, Chris. Very nice indeed.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself, to include just kind of your personal interests, your hobbies, before we dive into your personal life.
Oh my God. I didn't know you were going to do that.
Sorry. Your professional
I don't know.
life.
I don't know how far you're going to go. Certainly I'm worried. I'm an agent. I'm a literary agent. Like most agents, I would say probably all agents. I fell into it entirely by mistake. People often get into publishing kind of by mistake, and almost always actually become agents by mistake, or not necessarily by mistake, but it's not an established career path. People don't go to college and say, I really want to come out the other end and become a literary agent. It doesn't quite happen like that. It's usually an opportunity that opens up, or sometimes in some people's cases, of course, if they get made redundant from a publishing company, then they often do become agents because it's pretty much all they know what to do. In my case, I've had a series of fairly fortunate mistakes happen to me. I left school, started my own business, became a design studio, and then eventually became an advertising agency. I sold that when I was 30, not really sure what to do. Looked around for a bit. I didn't need to work for a year or so. And it struck me that where you want to really be in life is you want to be doing something that makes 3 things happen. One is obviously what everybody thinks about first of all, which is making money. You've got to make money. But beyond that, you've got to do something that is useful, I think, to other people. And also, I think a lot of people actually are quite idealistic and do actually want to, when they shuffle off the mortal coil, when they leave this earth eventually, I think they'd like to feel that they have made a difference and are leaving things a little bit better. So I kind of got all idealistic, and for a time I actually ran the Vegetarian Society in the UK. And that was interesting. It was a bit of a culture clash because I came from a fairly aggressive advertising background, and the Vegetarian Society was a very old established charity here in the UK. It was established 1847. Not very much changed actually in the 100 years since then. And one of the things I was doing at the Vegetarian Society was I started to open up a lot of discussions with book publishers to publish books for us about the ethos of vegetarianism, recipe books. It was at that stage in British society when vegetarianism, not veganism, because that really hadn't happened, but vegetarianism was just starting to go mainstream. So suddenly, the magazine that we put out, 5,000, 6,000 copies sold every month, we were looking at 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 copies sold. It was exploding. Food manufacturers were starting to put out meat replacement products. We're starting to see veggie burgers and things like that, veggie sausages and so on. So it was quite an interesting time. It was boom time, really. And lots of publishers wanted to work with us. Eventually, I left the Vegetarian Society and I got an offer from a publisher who I'd been dealing with, and they said, "Why don't you write us a book?" And I thought, well, yes, I'd never thought about writing books before, but I thought, yes, I probably could do that. I used to write advertising copy. They said, well, it should be 50,000 words long, and it should be titled "Why You Don't Need Meat." Make it a polemic. Make it all about the things that are wrong with eating meat and why people should go vegetarian. So I thought, yeah, I can do that. And I wrote the first page, which is, I don't know, about 150 words or so, which is all you'll typically write in an ad, of course, advertising copy. Then I thought to myself, oh my God, I don't know how I can write 50,000 words. I've never done that much before. But eventually I did manage to do it. So I had a lot of help in every sort of way, marketing and so on from the publisher. And it turned into a #1 national bestseller here in the UK. I was lucky enough back in the day to go on what was Britain's #1 talk show that every publisher wanted to get their authors onto. And this is in the day when there was far less media options, media choices around for people than there are now. Of course, no such thing as podcasts. And it meant that if you got onto this particular talk show, then probably 15 million people or so would see you. And almost invariably, you would actually have a #1 best-selling book that resulted from that. So I was very lucky in that respect. And we won all sorts of awards for the book, publicity campaigns, marketing, and so on. And I'm delighted to say that I had probably hundreds, maybe even more, letters from people who say that it did change their life. So from that, I thought, this is an amazing business, actually. I fell in love with publishing, and I'm still in love with publishing, even though it's a very frustrating business in many ways. But, at its best, we can change people's lives. And at the very worst, what do? Well, we entertain people. And that's not a bad thing these days. People want entertainment. So I think it really fills those three things for me. You can make money out of it. You can do something that people like and appreciate and improves their lives, even if it's just giving them entertainment. And eventually, you can leave the world a little bit better than it was. I mean, books change people's lives. No question about that. I've seen it happen for myself. Books change people's lives in a way that probably no other medium does. So that's the long story short.
Wow, now that's a great story. So, are you a vegetarian?
I'm not. I'm vegan. That's even worse. Would you like to know how that happened?
I would. I'd be very interested in hearing that story.
Okay, so it's kind of continuation, because when the book came out, Why You Don't Need Meat, and very lucky that it was published all over the world, actually. One of the strange things that happened, I still don't quite understand why, but an awful lot of pop stars were and still are vegetarian. And so a lot of pop stars got in touch, and amongst them were Paul and Linda McCartney. And I spent a day down at their farm, and Linda and I got on particularly well. And she said, I've always wanted to write a vegetarian cookbook, so to make it easier for people to go vegetarian. Could you help me do it? And I said, yeah, okay, let's do it. So I spent a lot of time working with Linda, quite often directly, actually, in her kitchen, working on this book, which at that time was just a book proposal. And this tells you really how things have changed, right? Because when we took that book proposal out to almost every publisher, they all come back and said, no, we can't see this sort of thing selling. And I was really puzzled because at the time, vegetarianism was booming. You got all these interesting new foods going from health food shops where they were kind of small minority things into supermarkets. They were going mainstream. But, publishers weren't really on board with that. And I remember one publisher, I won't embarrass them by saying who, said, well, we might publish it, but you've got to put some chicken recipes in it because otherwise no one's going to buy it. And I thought, you don't get it. You don't understand what's happening. So eventually we did get a deal. It wasn't a very big deal, but we did get a deal from a fairly new publisher, actually Bloomsbury. And I'm delighted to say exactly the same thing happened. Linda, bless her soul, promoted the hell out of it. She went on to Wogan, which is the talk show I mentioned to you. Next week, same thing happened. #1 hardback bestseller. So I'm lucky enough to have authored actually a paperback bestseller and a hardback bestseller. And it just sold millions of copies all the way around the world after that. So as we were preparing that book, the style of the book is really quite old-fashioned food. And Linda wouldn't have disagreed with that. It was very much the same sort of, meat and 2 veg sort of cooking that British people have been used to for hundreds of years, probably. And all that we did really was replace the meat with something else. And the thing that Linda always was keen on really was the ethics of it, and she was never really massively interested in healthy eating as such. So it meant that we were making a huge number of sort of dairy-based recipes, lots and lots of cheddar cheese, lots of fresh milk and so on. Not necessarily the healthiest food in the world, but certainly more ethical than eating flesh. So what you have to do, and when you do a book like that, is you've got to do enormous amounts of recipe testing. You've got to cook it, throw it away, make sure it works. Linda was really worried about getting pilloried for coming up with a recipe in the book that some newspaper tried and it doesn't work. So every recipe in that book was really tested to destruction. And what happened, funnily enough, to me was that eventually, after a number of weeks of doing this, I really started to get a strong aversion to dairy products. And that was the same time as I came across somebody who was the editor of the Vegan magazine here in the UK. The veganism was basically born in the UK, actually. A guy called Donald Watson came up with the name. I was lucky enough to meet him. And at that time, when there were just a handful of vegans, I mean, they all were told by doctors and scientists and the great and the good that what they were doing was really dangerous, and if they carried on eating without any animal products on their diet, they were going to die. So they were all kind of pioneers and taking a great risk, really, on what was perceived to be at the time a great risk. And I had this conversation with Colin Howlett, who was the editor of the Vegan magazine. He said, if you're a vegetarian because you're ethical about it, you really should go vegan. And I thought, I don't know, it sounds a bit extreme. But eventually I did, partly because I'd eaten so much dairy and cheese after doing all the recipe testing for Linda's book. And, after a week or two, I didn't look back. And now, if I sort of get a smell of cheese or something like that, all I can do actually, and this is kind of a shame because I used to enjoy cheese, all I can do, I can smell the cow in it, actually. It isn't really very attractive. And of course, these days, you've got so many food substitutes. You've got great vegan cheese. You've got all kinds of things that are vegan now. But it's amazing how, the perception has changed because I wrote probably 24 more books, most of them in conjunction with my wife, Peggy Brousseau. They were all vegan. But many of them were bestsellers, and many were serialized by, in this country, the Daily Mail, the biggest newspaper here. But we were we were warned really by our publishers, do not mention the fact that they're vegan, because that will stop people buying them. People will think you're insane, or you're eccentric, you're mad. Don't mention the V word. So we didn't. And of course, here we are now, and just into 2022, and of course, it's so fashionable. I mean, every celeb has got their own vegan cookbook coming out. Vegan meatless foods are mainstream. You can buy them all over the place. Even McDonald's, of all people, are got vegan offerings now. So I take great comfort in that, and it is satisfying to look back and think, I've played a small part in that. Linda played a bigger part in that, and it all ultimately comes down to the power of books to change our world, which is just extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm still in the business. I do a lot of fiction. I agent a lot of fiction as well, obviously. Some of it is just entertaining fiction. I wouldn't say it's got a higher purpose to any extent at all. But even then, you think, actually, we do hear a lot from young people who read some of my clients' fiction books, and it's really important to them. Some people write in and say, your books have not just changed my life, but have saved my life. I was in a very dark place, and reading your books helped me get through very difficult times. And again, you think, well, it's only fiction, but fiction can do that. I mean, my goodness me, what a powerful medium it is. So I never forget how humbling and honoring it is, really, to work in publishing. But also, of course, Chris, it can be very frustrating too.
Yeah, yeah. When did you realize that you were interested in helping other authors, replicate the success that you had with your bestsellers?
Um, I kind of moved into that. I think after Peg and I wrote about 2 dozen books together on all kinds of interesting subjects. Peggy still has lots of books that she wants to write. She's just recently done another cookbook, actually. I don't know if I will write any more books. I sort of reserve the right to maybe do one final book. But I started to think, when you write, you've really got to write out of passion, I think. And I'd started to feel that I'd written everything that I wanted to write. And at the same time, I moved into the publishing world, essentially from the advertising world. And there was a lot that I didn't find satisfactory about the representation that I personally had. So I got an agent. I thought I should have an agent. I got a literary agent. Wasn't particularly pleased. I got rid of them, got another agent. I worked with them for, I don't know how long, a few years maybe, but again, wasn't terribly pleased, and got rid of them, got a third agent. Same thing happened. And I started to think, well, I'm not really getting what I want. What I want is more like the model from the advertising world, where advertising agents also have clients. Advertising agents, literary agents, same word, but slightly different functions. But in the advertising world, you get a lot of service. If you're the client of an advertising agent, that agent will give you quite a lot of service because they don't want to lose your business. In the literary agenting world, it's a bit different. And one agent actually said to me, you don't understand how this business works. And I said, well, oh, okay, tell me. Please tell me. And he said, well, I make more money from not getting out of bed than I will do out of doing a good deal for you. And I said, well, how does that work? He said, well, it's a question really of all the old books on the backlist. And if you're lucky enough to have a father or a grandfather who started a literary agency decades ago, you will still be earning money from those deals that were done in some cases 50 years ago, if the author turns out to be one of the classic authors of the 20th century. So that means that the big agencies are less focused on doing fabulous deals for new authors than they are on just letting the money come in from sort of passive income, actually. Maybe that's a thought for aspiring authors too, actually, because a lot of aspiring authors, I think that they should automatically gravitate towards, the big name agencies. And actually, I would argue that, yeah, they may be good for some things. Absolutely. Certainly they may be. I'm not underestimating their power. But if you want a hungry agent who's going to really look after you and do a really good deal for you, because they've got to, because they've got to put food on their table too, then I would say you should consider maybe some of the newer, younger agencies who are setting up business now. They may be a better bet for the aspiring author.
Is that how you started Redhammer? Did it start from that point where you realized, okay, I'm fed up,
Yeah.
I'm not finding what I want, I'm not getting the level of service I want, and I want to be able to take that same frustration from other people who may be dealing with what I'm dealing with?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, actually. And I also, I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to work with the people I want to work with. So my agency is not a typical agency. A few years ago, when it was very clear that the digital tsunami was going to change publishing in very fundamental ways, I decided to drastically reduce the number of clients I had, and to help those clients, middlist clients really, who I was going to move away from, to help them find either other representation or to do their own thing. In many cases, actually, I think middlist authors are possibly better served by going the self-publishing route. That's very much an option these days for authors. There's no longer just one clear, obvious path to publication. You've got to think quite carefully about what's best for each author. There's no just,
Right.
Some people talk about traditional publishing or legacy publishing, was a little bit insulting, but it's not an easy decision actually these days. And you've got a huge range of publishers, ranging from the huge giants of the industry, some which are emerging, of course, right through to interesting new digital publishers. You've got a lot of options there. And then, of course, you've also got the option, which is just completely self-publishing, doing your own Kindle stuff, maybe even doing your own audiobooks too. So it's not as simple as it used to be. And the publishing business, in many ways, is very, very conservative. It's very slow to change. If you look at the whole of the 20th century in publishing, really, there was only one big thing that happened actually for the entire 100 years, and that was the invention of the paperback book. And publishing was very hostile to the idea of the paperback book to begin with. I mean, they didn't like it at all. In the UK here, we have one or two magazines covering the publishing trade. One of them is called The Bookseller, very old, august publication. It used to call itself the organ of the book trade, which is, I think, frankly, a bit hilarious. And they refused to mention paperback books. They said, these things are disgusting. We don't like them at all. They're cheap. They're printed on cheap paper. They're probably bought by people who haven't washed. We don't want to be involved in this. So for a goodly period of time, the trade magazine wouldn't even mention paperback books. And then you had the growth of paperback publishers, because hardback publishers wouldn't publish paperback books. So you've got a new breed of publisher emerging who only publish paperback books. So if you're an author here in the UK, halfway through the 20th century, you would probably have two publishers. You'd probably have your hardback publisher, and you'd probably have a completely different publisher who'd publish your paperbacks. That wasn't unusual at all. So you can see that the industry has always been really quite slow moving. It hasn't changed very much, and it doesn't much like change. And now, here we are, 2 decades into the 21st century, and it's change every week. It's extraordinary.
Yes.
The pace of change is just shocking now in my business. As I say, to my friends and publishers and authors, if you're not working at least twice as hard now as you were 5 years ago, you're probably going to be out of a job soon. So it's a bit catastrophic. And I think no one can ultimately tell how this tsunami of digital change is going to leave our business changed. I don't know what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time, but I do know that everything now needs very close examination. You've got to have good advice, and you've got to really, I think, increasingly rely on your agent, not just to do deals, which frankly are not that difficult, but actually to do a bit more than that. I think the agent has got to increasingly become your marketing manager. They've got to certainly get involved in the writing process. I mean, I always say that a good agent is the author's best friend and worst critic. And I think best friend because you've got to have the skills now to guide the author through some very difficult, not, simple publishing choices, but also you've got to have the relationship, really, an equal relationship, I think, where that allows you to turn around to the author and say, I can see where you're going with this, but frankly, it's not working. And it's not working for these reasons. Now, if you have got that sort of relationship, that's brilliant. But if you haven't, then I think it's going to be quite a difficult future, actually, for writers.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into something I wanted to ask you. Like on your website, you have this amazing proclamation. I saw it. I was like, that's brilliant. Where
Yeah.
you say you want to reinvent the role of the literary agent from the ground up.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit because it seems like that's what you're alluding to in the last segment.
Yeah.
Right there. Talk more about like how does that get done? How did you perform that?
Well, I think it's got to come initially from the author. And I think sometimes we get a bit obsessed with the idea of books, whether they're physical or digital, Kindle. And I think ultimately we're not in the book production business. The business that we're in as agents is the business of leveraging maximum value out of the creative IP that the client creates. If that's not a sentence that's too full of buzzwords, I'm sorry if it is. But the basic idea is that your client is a storyteller. They tell stories. They make up extraordinary stories. They create new worlds that that readers want to live in, and they live vicarious lives through the genius that is the storyteller, the author. I mean, they're strange people. Let's not beat about the bush here. They're not average people. They see things a little bit differently. They've got often they're a bit introverted. They keep to themselves. I mean, writing itself, of course, is quite an isolating job actually, unless you're writing with a writing partner, which does happen for films and television quite a lot, but much less so with prose writing books. So, what is it that the agent actually has to do? And I would argue that you've got to get involved right in the beginning. You've got to use your knowledge of the business and opportunities that it creates to stop the author from making mistakes, to stop the author from spending 5 years writing 500,000 words that no one's ever going to read. You've got to do that. You've got to guide them into new areas. You've got to think about what happens beyond the deal. You've got to think about maybe not putting the agent's interests first, which is kind of a hot button at the moment, really, in my business. But an awful lot of deals are done that favour the agents and less so the author. For example, I mean, is it in the author's point of view to do a deal that lasts the length of copyright for that particular manuscript? Those are the sorts of deals that a lot of publishers want to do because it means they're going to sit on those rights, maybe for 100 years or more. And from the agent's point of view, of course, the agent's going to keep on taking money from that sort of deal. But is that really in the author's point of view, best interest? It is possible these days to do deals that are much shorter term, especially with newer publishers who are springing up, digital first publishers. You can do really quite short term deals. That might be a better way to go for some authors and some projects. You've got to think very hard about all these options, actually. There's no one size fits all solution anymore. So that's why I think an agent increasingly has to be a marketing manager. They've got to think very hard about the work that an author does and how we're going to leverage maximum value out of that. Part of the way, obviously, is doing publishing deals. But I think beyond that, there are other interesting possibilities too. I mean, I've done a lot of really interesting, actually quite often very high value film and television deals. And increasingly, it seems over the past few years that, writing the book is really only the doorway to opening up quite a lucrative film and television career, actually. Even if the author doesn't themselves want to write the screenplay, you can still sell film and television rights for really quite a lot of money. This is partly a reflection, of course, of the rise of the streamers, the Netflix, the Hulus, all the rest of these people who have been desperate for material. I think we're seeing a bit of consolidation in that area at the moment. I think the sort of deals that it's been possible to do over the past few years may not be possible to do over the next few years, there may not be such high value deals available, in which case, well, where are we going to go? How are we going to make more money for the author? How are we going to make sure, the author can put food on the table and we're going to go, oh, we're going to be okay too? I think we're going to have to be very creative there. There are options opening up. I'm very interested personally in getting to know more and more about the games area. As you probably know, games now, computer games, the whole area is worth far more than film and television combined. There's lots of money in that. Very few agents at the moment have any expertise in that. I think we have to become a lot more flexible. We have to see potential there. I think also that there's another area too that very few agents at the moment have any expertise in, and maybe don't even want expertise in, and that is this whole area of self-publishing. I think initially people thought it's kind of a two-tier thing, really. You've got your main publishing business, which is represented by all the publishing majors and some of the medium-sized publishers, all of whom have been around for a long time. And then, if you can't do a deal with them, you probably have to self-publish yourself. So, you've got your first-class publishing and you've got your second-class publishing. I think that's a completely wrong reading of the situation now. And what we've seen over the past, decade or so, is we've seen a very interesting, steady stream of authors migrating from traditional publishing into self-publishing, almost always without the help, aid, or assistance of agents. They're doing it for themselves, guys. They're kind of leaving us behind. We can't let that happen. So typically what happens is you've got a middle-list author, somebody who perhaps is a bit overlooked, and they probably are a genre writer, maybe writing crime fiction or something like that. And they're probably quite prolific. They can probably write 2 books a year, maybe 3 books a year, or even more, actually. But they never get the recognition they want out of traditional publishing, kind of overlooked. Traditional publishing is very good at promoting lead titles, those important books that publishers spend huge amounts of money acquiring, even more money promoting, and hopefully they're going to work. They're not so good at looking after the bread and butter side of publishing, the lead title people, the genre writers, the people who are not Stephen King, but they're still producing, works that can sell 10, 15, 20,000 copies, something like that. Not huge sellers, but still very respectable, especially if you're doing 2 or 3 books a year. So that sort of author typically in the past is maybe earning, I don't know, something between $25,000 and say $50,000 a year from traditional publishing. It's okay, but it's not much more than the average wage, really, and they have to work very hard for it. So if you think about a publisher, an author in that situation, then suddenly you've got this interesting new area of self-publishing opening up, and they can take their income. They can sell the same number of books, maybe even more, actually, but they take their income. They can put a zero on it, and suddenly they're not earning $25,000 a year. They're earning $250,000 a year. I mean, that's impossible to say no to. So you've seen a stream of authors migrate from middle-list big publishers, doing their own thing, moving into self-publishing now. Who has been helping them to do that? The answer is actually no one. Or kind of, to some extent, I guess authors do help themselves to do it because they do talk to each other a little bit. Agents haven't. And I think that's yet another area that we've got to be, I think, agnostic about the ultimate destination of our authors' work. We've got to get away from this mindset that says, you've got to be published by Simon & Schuster, you've got to be published by Penguin Random House or HarperCollins or something like that. Otherwise, I'm not interested. I mean, that's just crazy now. We've got to have an increasingly broad range, I think, of resources and expertise that will help authors, whatever their publishing decisions are. I think we've got to be ready and waiting. And I'll tell you one thing as well. I think, I don't want to go on about this. I mean, we can talk about lots of other things. But I'll tell you one thing. I think if we provide a broader range of services for authors, if we make more money for them, I think we can make more money out of it. And I said to, I think the last agent who represented me, I said, you know what, I would love to pay you 25% commission. And he kind of looked at me like I'd gone insane. I said, no, I really would. I would like to pay you 25% commission because back in those days, I think the average commission was about 15%, 20% on foreign and film and television. I said, no, I want to pay you more, but I want you to do more. And I said, if you make a bigger cake for me, I would be delighted to give you a bigger slice. I'll just, that's great business for me. And he just laughed and said, no, you don't know how it works. But I think that's still true. I think I've never had an author say, I want to negotiate your commission down. I think authors actually want the opposite. I think most authors would love to pay their agents more if the agents actually provided more in the way of services, maybe looking after their online presence, maybe helping them to make the transition from traditional publishing to a different form of publishing. I don't know, but I think we've got to be agnostic about that and do really whatever is the right course of action for the author's output, and that does require more resources and experience and expertise than I think traditionally agents have had.
And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said looking out for the best interests of the author. As an author, that's what I would want. I want my agent to look out for my best interest because, like you said, if I'm excelling and I'm doing well, then naturally my agent should do well too. And we
Yeah,
should be in this
exactly.
kind of this symbiotic relationship where the better I do, the better you do, as
Yeah,
opposed to the other
yeah.
way around where, well, my agent's making good money, but I'm not reaping the rewards of that. And like
Yeah.
you said, it's hard money to make. With that in mind, you talked about just how the agent being the point person who helps out with the author's marketing and just the
Mm,
publicity. From an agent standpoint, just as you work, how important is author platform? Because I know a lot of agents harp on platform. They want authors who either have
mm.
established or large platforms or authors who have the potential to have a large following. How much importance do you as an agent place on platform?
That's a really good question. It's a question I get asked quite a lot. There is no one easy answer to that. The publishing business as a whole has been really slow to understand the digital world, which is partly because a lot of people in publishing have been kind of old and they've not really got it. But also, actually, I mean, thinking about some of the younger publishers who I've come across, can be very, very sort of superficial in their judgment. In other words, if you've got 100,000 Twitter followers, clearly you're going to have a bestseller. If you've got 500,000 followers on TikTok or something, yeah, you can have a bestseller. That's actually not true. It simply is not true. And I think we have been guilty, and possibly some of us still are, in the past, saying to authors, forget about the writing, guys. What you want is a great YouTube presence. You want to be on all over social media, Facebook, and all the rest of it. And the authors turn around and say, "There's only 24 hours in the day. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to write great manuscripts, or do you want me to spend all my time on TikTok?" You know, I mean, we do ask
Right.
an awful lot. And then there is this other thing, of course, we come back again to the idea of self-publishing. So, okay, let's say you've got this great social media presence all out there. That's actually what publishers want. They want you to sell the books for them, actually. If you've got, I don't know, let's say 500,000 followers, what should we say? We say, I don't know, 1% of them might buy your book. So that's what? That's 5,000 books we sold. Good start. Well, if that is the case, why don't you just sell your books directly? You see, that's the thing. And more authors are thinking that. I'm building up my social media presence, okay, but why should I sell books to them, for say 7% of the of the cover price when I could be making it all? And it doesn't make sense. So I think that's a very lazy response now from publishers, sort of say, you've got to have vast social media presence, otherwise we're not interested, or from agents to say that. Because A, there is research now to show that isn't the case, actually. Just having a large social media following, full stop, doesn't equate necessarily with selling lots of books, funny enough. It actually doesn't. And B, authors are not stupid. They know actually what you're saying by that is, we can't be bothered to sell your books. We'll publish them, but you've got to sell them. Now, that doesn't sound like a good deal to me. And I think increasingly authors are realizing that. So should you have social media presence? I'm not saying you shouldn't. If you enjoy it, yes. If it's something that kind of fits in with what you're doing in any case, yes. If you can see a route to sales, again, yes. If it's not going to take over your life, yes, which means it's not going to eat into your creative writing time. But under other circumstances, increasingly, I would be looking actually to the publisher and not to the author. I'd be looking to the publisher to sell books, and that's one of the discussions. I mean, when I go out with a project, it doesn't always work like this, but ideally, what I try to do is to get a whole range of publishers interested in the project or the proposal. And then, we'll have offers from a range of publishers. We may have marketing ideas and plans and suggestions from a range of publishers too. That's where we want to be. Sometimes we might only get one offer from one publisher, in which case, you're kind of stuck with one offer. But if you get more than one offer, that's the whole thrust, really. That's really what the agent needs to be doing during the sales process. It's broadening the sales funnel, so you get lots of people interested in it, because that then gives you and the author a lot of options. And one of the factors you need to think about is, how are you going to sell my books? Do you have a clear idea? Do you have a plan? Do you have a strategy? Or, as some publishers still do, are you kind of expecting me, really, when it comes down to it, to actually sell the books for you? Because if you are, suddenly your offer doesn't sound so interesting anymore. And of course, this is one of the ways in which, as I mentioned earlier, publishing has been changing drastically, and in some cases not for the better. That traditional publishers were great at getting distribution. They had fabulous relationships with all the major booksellers, all the major book-selling chains, right down to the level of local booksellers. And of course, all over the Western world, we've seen that industry pretty much decimated, partly, by a number of things, really, partly by the initial onslaught of digital publishing, but also increasingly in the past couple of years or so by lockdown. Actually, it's been quite hard to get into your local physical corner bookstore and browse the shelves, which is a pleasure that maybe we may not have in the future, which I'll be very, very sad about. But it's probably the reality that bookstores are going to continue to decline. So traditional publishers have been great at getting physical books out into the distribution. Nobody else could do it as well. If you take that out of the equation, though, that means they're not really selling that vast tranche of books that the authors always expected them to sell. And instead of that, it's digital, it's online, it's a little bit of distribution to indie bookstores. Who's going to be selling the books, guys? Is it the author or is it the publisher? If the publisher has got a way to do it, that's great. But if they haven't, if they're expecting you to do it somehow vaguely through social media, I think we should just be firm on that and dig our heels and say, you know what? I don't really enjoy it. I don't enjoy being on Facebook 18 hours a day. I don't think it's going to do any good. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to expect my publisher to sell the books. I mean, interestingly, of course, there are options arising now for publishers. I mean, this is just in passing. I mean, this is one interesting reason why perhaps authors should consider smaller publishers sometimes, maybe digital-only publishers, maybe publishers who specialize in quite a narrow genre. Because publishers who do that, granted, they're not the giants of the world. They can't afford to slap down massive advances on the table in front of you, but they do know their market. They know their readers. And quite a lot of genres like women's fiction, for example, crime fiction, have what I guess is sometimes rather, insultingly called heavy users, heavy consumers. These are people who will think nothing of buying 3, 4, or even more books a month. And those people are great. And some publishers really specialize in genre selling. They know their genres inside out, and they can take on an author and quite confidently say, we know we're going to sell 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 because we know our audience. I think that's great, and those are publishers that perhaps authors ought to think about when they don't always do that. Especially aspiring authors often have just one aim in mind, really, which is, I've got to be published by a big publisher. That's my aim. That's my goal in life. I've got to get there. Well, the disappointing news is that if you do get there, and if you're not treated by them as a lead title, in other words, if you don't get the massive amount of resources behind lead titles, you may well be very disappointed. You may not sell many books at all. So again, I guess we come full circle and say, actually, really, that's why agents should be in the conversation. That's why we need to have a lot of strings to our bow now. It's not just doing deals anymore with big publishers. We've got to get beyond that. I must also just mention, Chris, before the end of the show, years ago, I mean, I'm talking a long time ago, before, in the days when computers were steam powered, actually, I started this online community for authors called Lutopia. And I did it just because I thought it would be a fun thing to do, because I've always been interested in digital things. And it's kind of grown. It was never intended to be a money-making operation. It was just something I thought was a good thing to do, partly because even in the early days of computers, authors had computers. They wrote on computers. They were some of the early adopters of computers. And also, as I mentioned earlier, writing is really quite an isolating thing. So probably if you are writing full time, you probably don't know that many other authors. So I thought it'd be interesting, fun experiment to create a writing community. So Lutopia actually became the first writing community on the net, and it's still there. And the interesting thing is, although it's still quite old fashioned, it's just runs on bulletin board software, probably about 20 years old, which is very old in computer terms. It does serve a function that is quite important, and it's partly social. It partly gives authors a chance to kind of let off steam at the end of the day when they've been working hard on the coalface. But it also allows a free exchange of information, like what's working. Are you on TikTok? Has that worked for you? Why not? It allows authors to pick up information like that. And I think we have to be really open to all possibilities these days. I was talking earlier about doing deals with games developers. I'm sure there are lots of other potential deals out there and areas to be explored. We can only really do that together. We will try lots of things that are not going to work. Absolutely, we will, because in many ways this is kind of year zero for publishing now. We're pretty much not just reinventing what literary agents are. The whole industry essentially really is reinventing itself, and hopefully it's going to find itself relevant to our culture. And if we don't meet and exchange and say, I tried that, didn't work, I tried that, didn't work, but I did try this and I got some good response. Because actually, authors are not really in competition with each other. They often adopt a fairly competitive mindset to other authors, but they're not. It's not a question. A book buyer doesn't say, well, I'm going to buy a book by Chris or Peter today. They don't think like that. They can buy both if they want to. The real thing is, what are we in competition with? We're in competition with YouTube. We're in competition with computer games. We're in competition with anything that stops people from, reading a full-length book. So I think the more we get together, the more we share information, the more we share insights, experiences, advice, things that work, things that don't work, the better. And the healthier our industry will be. So that's why, I got Lutopia going, and I'm pleased to say it's going from strength to strength.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I think it's very important for writers to have community. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and the Twitter writing community is just dynamite. People just lifting each other up, helping each other out, giving each other advice, critiquing covers, talking about what agents they're working with, how they're working out. Yeah. So I think, it's like you said, it's a very
I totally agree.
business.
There's only one thing I would say, and that is a bit public. It's a little bit public. You just want to be a bit careful, because the next publisher you pitch to, they're going to type your name into Google, they're going to come up with all these tweets and get to go, yeah. So just be a little careful.
Yeah. So when working with authors, you talked about writing books and presenting them to various publishing houses for acceptance. Is it important through the author's proposal that they're able to demonstrate that they can actually market the book, that they do know who the audience is and they're willing to help out?
That's a dynamite question. It actually goes to the heart of what we're just talking about. Okay, so this is the thing. In a book proposal, you do need, yes, you absolutely must address that issue. Really important. You've got to demonstrate as clearly as you can that there is a market out there for your book, or maybe for your series, and that it's reachable. And there's several good ways to do that. Now, that's what you must do. I would say there's a line after that you don't want to go over. And the line that you don't want to go over is one that often authors do go over in their natural enthusiasm, to get that first publishing deal. And that is to say, look, guys, there is an audience out there, there's a market out there, and I can reach them. But what you're basically saying is to the publishers, guys, I'm going to sell the books for you. And of course, a lot of publishers like that. But I would argue that's the publisher's job. It's not your job to sell those books. Or if it is, then why don't you just self-publish it yourself and take all the money in any case? So I would say, yes, you absolutely must build a case that there's a market out there and it's reachable. And you could even go as far as saying, look, it's reachable. And I think there are some interesting stories here that would work in terms of media that's going to reach the target market for you to implement. Not me, but for you to implement. But at that point, I would then want to turn the conversation around, actually, and say, look, guys, you've seen how good Chris is. You've seen his words. You've got some sample chapters there. They're dynamite. You know the rest of this proposal is great. We've already established there's a market out there. One of the ways you can establish there's a market out there is by reference to previous titles that have actually worked. Because publishers are demons when it comes to looking at previous sales of previous books. They've got access to all the data, Nielsen, BookScan, you name it. They can just type a name in. They can say, okay, yep, that book sold 50,000, that book sold 75, that book sold 750,000. They know it. So one of the ways you can do that is you can actually refer to very similar books. I would call it being on the same bookend. So where does your book fit? So it fits a little bit in between this book and that book. Okay, that's fine. That's starting to build a case that there's a market out there. And if the two book that it kind of fits into, if you imagine yourself being a physical bookstore now, your book is in the middle of the shelf. Either side of it, there are other similar books, not exactly the same, but kind of similar. That's starting to establish there's a market out there. Then the publisher can, do their computer wizardry, hack into Nielsen, BookScan, and say, yeah, okay. Book on the left has sold 100,000 copies. Book on the right has sold 500,000 copies. We think there's a good market out there, and we think it's quite reachable. So that's really important stuff to establish. What I often see, and what's on the other side of the coin, and what you shouldn't do really, is just not think about it. And I do see too many proposals from aspiring authors who've never thought about who's going to read the book. They're just writing what they want to write, which is fine, and probably their friends and family will buy it, but nobody else. And they are not aware of the fact that there's got to be a sort of groundswell out there. I mean, ultimately, this is quite interesting. I mean, ultimately, how do you sell books? And I would argue, actually, you sell books today the same way that they were selling books 100 years ago, ultimately. It might, the medium might be a bit different, but ultimately it's actually word of mouth. It's the same way that J.K. Rowling got her start, Tiny little publishing deal, nearly didn't get a deal at all, but a tiny little publishing deal. But people just liked it, and they said to other people, this is good, you should try it. And then somebody else said that, and the whole thing just grew like a chain reaction. And that's really how it works. So, yeah, you've got to mention the potential market out there. You've got to demonstrate that you're aware of the fact they've got to sell books. You've got to help them move the book into a particular genre. Just one more tip here as well. Please, if you're describing the genre of your book, and all those have to do that at some point, please don't describe your book as literary fiction. Just don't do that. It's like the kiss of death. What it means is that you've not thought about it really. Books that are literary, generally speaking, unless they're written by a really well-known, well-established author, who's already got great profile, probably sell about 500 copies. It's kind of the commercial kiss of death. Don't describe your book as literary fiction. Describe it as let other people say that when the book is published, when it's found its genre, when you get reviewed in the New York Times or something like that. Let other people say that. Say Chris's book is amazing literary fiction. That's great. It's a compliment, but that isn't really the genre. Never describe that as a genre, because it's basically saying to people like me, you haven't thought about it, and it hasn't actually got any solid, well-defined genre.
Yeah, there's one more thing I want to ask you about that authors I see happen a lot, and it's like, I wonder if it makes agents cringe a little bit when an author says there's no book like mine that's been written.
Okay. Well, now I tell you what, if that's true, that would be really interesting. But it probably isn't true because I mean, I don't know anymore. Actually, this is quite interesting. I hadn't thought about this for a long time. I don't know anymore how many books are actually published each year now. It's because it's so hard to work out, what is publishing and what is not publishing. I mean, it could be tens of millions if you include everyone who's kind of self-publishes something. I just don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's never been a book like this before. I think, different people are going to respond in different ways. I would personally be interested in that, but I would possibly consider that to be a mark of naivety, a mark that, the author hadn't actually done their research. And the other downside, of course, is that, I'm sorry to say this, but if it's not in a genre that is easy to define, the question is going to arise, who's going to buy it? And that is a question that must be addressed in a book proposal, together with the second question that publishers often ask me, actually. And it's a toughie, and it's something you need to think about in advance. So the first question is, who's going to buy it? Who is going to buy this book? And if you say, well, no one's written a book like this before, the suggestion is maybe it's in a genre that doesn't exist. So it's kind of might just find an audience of one. So that's a bit of a problem. But the corollary to that is, why now? Why now? Who is going to buy this book? Why should it be published now? What is it that's going to make it attractive to today's reader? Now, that's a toughie, actually, because you can't ever prove that. But because so much of book publishing is a gamble, actually. That's why, I say the best publishers usually have got a good gambling instinct. They've got a good nose for stuff they think is going. No publisher ever gets it right all the time, but the best publishers got a good instinct for what's going to work in about 12 to 18 months' time, which is the typical sort of production cycle of a book, and that's quite hard. Who's going to buy it, and why should it be published now? Difficult question to answer. You can answer it quite often with reference to other things that are going on in the zeitgeist right now, with reference to, I don't know, big trends, or sometimes other genres that are emerging, or just things that are in the news, maybe. The trouble with things in the news, of course, is that they're very ephemeral, and they may be, very popular today, but in 18 months' time, when your book's published, it might be incredibly old-fashioned. There's a timeliness to books quite often, especially with, nonfiction books. I mean, I did a huge book about Enron some years ago now, and that was a massively successful book, and did a fabulous film deal as well. And I don't think we would have done that deal if we had been 2 or 3 weeks later. I mean, everyone works so hard at that, day in, day out, just getting that proposal done, getting it under the nose of publishers, getting the deal done, and then getting it out to the film and television world. So timeliness is a very big thing. Why now? Sometimes it's as vague as saying, because it's in the zeitgeist now, and I can prove it with reference to, cuttings from well-known magazines or websites or something like that. At other times, it's even harder, actually, because you just got a strong feeling. I mean, ultimately, Chris, I'll leave you with this one word, okay? And that is, what is my industry about? Actually, what is my industry all about? I'll give you, it's all about one thing, just one word: emotion. It's all about emotion. It's all about the way people feel about things. It's about the way the publishers feel about your book proposal. It's about the way that potential buyers feel about your book, and it's about the feelings that you create in readers when they finally read your book that's been published. So I think that's rather a wonderful thing, but it does mean ultimately that this is more of an art, maybe a magical art, actually, than a science. Science does come into it, but it's still got that, when AI is, there will be some publisher out there who eventually, or maybe sooner rather than later, say, oh, we don't need authors anymore. They're expensive and they deliver manuscripts late and they're a pain in the ass to deal with. Oh, we'll get it all done, but we've got this wonderful factory full of AI. It can just produce as many crime fiction books as you want. It won't work. It won't work. And the reason it won't work is because it's that human to human contact. It's the emotional content that really counts for everything. Extraordinary.
Yeah, no, good answer. I really appreciate that. Now, my next question revolves around location. I'm an American,
Hmm.
right? And of course, you're in the UK. There are agencies all over the world. Should an American author query an agent outside the US, or should and the same vice versa for a British author or a Canadian author? Should they query agents outside of their country first?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's absolutely international business. I was unusual because I live in London, but I really when I started agenting, actually, I mean, I really focused on New York because the deals are much bigger. And to be honest, actually, and back in those days, it was much easier just to bang the door down and New York publishers see the vice president of a major publishing company than it was in London because London was such a small, closed little shop. I hadn't been to university with all the publishers, so I found it easy just to get on a plane and spend a week a month in New York and do lots of great deals there. Quite often representing American authors to American publishers, but sometimes doing the opposite too, representing British authors to American publishers and American authors to British publishers. And since then, it's become even more international. And of course, with lockdown, I mean, all we do now is just run Zoom all day long. It doesn't matter. You might still find some old-fashioned agents who are not comfortable dealing with someone who's not in their own country. But I don't know. I mean, the whole idea of territoriality in publishing is basically dying. And it has been a big issue for a number of publishers because, when you sell rights to a publisher, typically the agent will try and sell as few rights as possible, and the publisher will want all the rights. They'll want world rights, so that's part of the negotiation that goes on. If you're an aspiring author right now and you are wondering about whether you should query agencies who are not in your country, I would say you'd absolutely go for it. Um, the industry as a whole has been in the past. It is a small industry, actually. I mean, people talk and talk and talk about publishing, but actually, in money terms, it's a small business, really. And it means there's quite a small number of people involved in it. I would say, and I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but heck, I've been in trouble before. Um, Certainly in the past, you should really be looking for an agency either in London or in New York. Agencies outside of those two locations, because those are undoubtedly the world capital of publishing. Other markets are very significant too. Obviously Japan is huge, Germany is huge, and so on. But in terms of English language publishing, it really does focus on that twin axis of New York and London. So publishing being quite a small business, it is quite important. It has been quite important for agents and publishers to know each other, to talk to each other, have drinks with each other. We even have a club in London here I belong to called Groucho's. Agents and publishers go to. So doing deals like that has been kind of the norm. And if you're thinking about an agency that's nowhere near either of those two places, then maybe it's possible that agent doesn't have such good level contacts with the main publishing business as somebody who's based in New York or London. That's possible. I've got to say, of course, that's all changed. Lockdown has changed things radically. We all do. It doesn't matter. You can be living on a desert island and still you're doing your Zoom. So territoriality and physical location probably less important now. I would be looking more actually, rather than the location of the agency you're interested in selling to. I'd be looking more at the sort of work they've done. I'll be looking at who they are. It is a personal relationship, so you should be thinking about who is that person that's going to come back to me. If you're pitching to an agent, say through their website, they will have fairly clear submission requirements. You'll probably be going in at the level of the slush pile, which is a horrible expression. I hate it. I don't know any other industry that treats our new product development process as contemptuously, as calling it the slush pile. Nevertheless, the quality of unsolicited submissions is usually very low. which is why it's called the slush pile. And very, very few of them actually make it. But if you do get over that initial hurdle, and if you get an agent coming back to you saying, "I'm really interested in this. Can you send me more?" That's an invitation really to start to open up a dialogue. And certainly you should be sending them more, but you should also be looking to speak to them, Skyping, Zooming, whatever. And you'd be looking to start the relationship off, I would say, on an equal level. In other words, yes, I'm really interested in you. You're obviously interested in me. Now, let's talk about how this might go. What can you bring to the table? What do you typically do? Who would you take this to? You ask them straight out. How much money do you think I'm going to get for it? Put them on the spot a bit. See who they are. I mean, it's all about people. It's about relationships. It's all about how you feel about each other. It's about whether they've got expertise in the area that you're writing in, whether they handle other authors in that area. If they do, they probably know lots of publishers in that area and might be well placed to sell you into that genre. One of the biggest problems with my job is I work so hard to try and sell a manuscript to a publisher, and then I'll take it out to maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 publishers, and I try so hard to get them all interested. If I do get them all interested, I can only sell that manuscript once. It's awful. I might have offers on the desk from 7 or 8 publishers, but I can only do one deal. It's tragic. There's other people there with showing me the money, but I can't do the deal. So if somebody else then approaches me and says, "Well, I'm writing in this genre, and I see you've done a fair number of deals in this genre. What can you do for me?" I would say that's actually a good sign, because they probably know most of the publishers who are interested in that area, and they've probably had offers from them in the past that they haven't been able to take up. So, get on the phone or whatever they use and say to whoever it is, XYZ, "I'm so sorry we couldn't accept your offer for the last manuscript I took out. So-and-so got it for a lot more money. But I've got an amazing new author with a manuscript sitting in front of me that I think you're going to love. It's very similar. Do you want to discover the next big thing?" So, there's one possible strategy for you.
Oh, it's such a process, man. It's almost like a combination of like being a sports agent and a litigator,
Yes, it is. Oh, yes. Look, actually, funnily enough, in publishing, one of the nicer things about the industry, because it can be kind of slack, actually.
Yeah.
But one of the nicer things is there is very little litigation. People don't usually end up suing each other, thank heavens.
Right. So for you, what makes a query really stand out to you? Like if I were to send you a query and say, "Hey, Mr. Cox, here's my book, blah, blah, blah." What are you looking for? Like what cues or clues are you looking for that this person gets it and it's someone I think I'd like to go next level with?
Yeah. Another very, very perceptive question. I think it's not the first time you've asked this, Chris, is it?
You know what? I'm just a very curious person. What I try to do is always try to think of, okay, what does my listener want to know? What would I want to know about an agent, or what would I want to know about the whole idea of querying somebody? Because I feel like a lot of the times when you're dealing with that, sometimes we kind of fly blind into it as opposed to really doing the homework and getting like you talked about before, like understanding what the agent has published, what the agent's track record is, what their wish list looks like, what sort of things that what sort of genres they like to work with, and then being able to take all that information, package it, and then bring it properly.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very good question. I can give you a nice simple answer to that. The first thing is concept, which sometimes is expressed through a small synopsis. I mean, synopses are not often things that authors like to write, actually. In fact, they usually hate them. But so that's the first thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for a commercial concept. Most of the time, let's say 90% of the time, the concept is not commercial. All right, so fail. For those 10% of concepts that are really quite interesting, I'm then looking for execution. I'm looking for the ability to write compelling words that the reader is just going to want to turn the page. And that's the only rule of writing that counts. Keep the reader turning the page. You've got to do that. If you can demonstrate you can do that, then I can do a great deal for you. So initially, concept is any good, 90% no. If the concept is good, can the author execute it? Again, 90% no. So if we get through those two hurdles, I'm really interested.
All right, that's simple. That's nice
Yeah.
and easy. All right, and so you've got something on your website called pop-up submissions. Can you talk about
Oh,
that a
yeah.
little bit? How does that work for
Yeah.
authors?
Wow, this is something that's grown out of Lutopia. We've done all sorts of crazy things inside Lutopia. We've tried all kinds of things. It's really kind of a laboratory, actually, for people to try things. Pop-up submissions is something that has worked really quite well. We started, I think about 3 years ago now, actually, in a very primitive form. Now we now do it every Sunday live. Idiot that I am, I thought, well, authors, especially aspiring authors, have no idea at all what actually happens inside the acquisition meeting. What they have no idea what happens when people like me look at their submissions, their manuscripts and stuff. So why don't we do it all live and public, and make a complete idiot of myself, and together with my guests, so authors can finally see what goes on behind the scenes. So that's what we've been doing for, I think, 3 years. So every week, I'll invite a couple of guests on. One of whom is usually an author. One of whom is usually somebody from the publishing business, and we will look at 5 submissions. We obviously won't look at a long submission. What we ask for is, this is how we mark, actually. We want your title, and we will give you marks for the title. We want the blurb. We want you to write a really good blurb that I, as a lazy agent, can then pass on to my publisher, who's also equally lazy, and they can just use that blurb straight on the back of your book without changing a word. That's brilliant. If we can have a great blurb, we like that a lot. We then look for 700 words, the first 700 words, please, from your book. Very hard for authors to do that, I think. Authors mostly write themselves into their manuscripts. But nevertheless, it's commercial criteria. And quite often I have had submissions in the past, from authors who sort of say, I know it's a bit slow to get going, and I didn't really get into it. I didn't hit my stride until page 50 or 60. But after that, I think it really heats up. And I think, you can't do that. I mean, you can't publish a book with a little note on it saying this isn't very good to begin with, but when by the time you've read 3 or 4 dozen pages, it gets quite good. You can't do that. You've got to hit your stride from the very first word, no question about it. That's one of your fundamental skills as an author. If you're no good at it, you're not going to get published. The good news is you can learn it, actually. It's an acquired skill. It's not necessarily something you're born with. So we're looking for amazing 700 words that really wants us to read on. And then finally, there's this other thing, the kind of mysterious thing that we call the bang. And that really is just the commercial appeal. So you might have a great title, you might have an amazing blurb, you might have an extraordinary 700 words, but tragically, sadly, it just may not be commercial at all. So we're looking, we spent an awful long time sort of working this out, and it's evolved a lot over the past few years. But really, that really is how, submissions are mostly evaluated, actually. And people sometimes say, well, only 700 words. I mean, that's ludicrous. That's ridiculous. And I'm afraid it is kind of ridiculous, but it's also pretty much what happens, actually. You send in your 100,000 word manuscript, sometimes physically, they've got, I don't know, 500, 600 pages or so. And actually, you're only going to get maybe the first 10 pages read. And if you don't hook the person who's looking at your submission there, then you lost them. And the rest of your manuscript, you might as well have just, shredded it, really. It's kind of a learning process for everybody. I think one of the great things that's happened, and I wasn't aware of this at the time, but, it's just extraordinary, really. I mean, we get a lot of people from the community, from Lutopia, come into our chat room live. I call it the genius room because they're just full of amazing insights. And I think it's good for them because they can take. They also vote in the same way as I and my guests vote. They vote too. They vote too. So we're getting a real time popular view on the manuscript as it appears on the screen, and it's also narrated. We have a team of narrators as well. So the author can get an extraordinary insight, because as as the manuscript passes up on the screen, it usually takes about 5 minutes to read it. They can see what people are thinking about it in real time, and writers have never had that option before. Now, sometimes it's horrible, because the genius rooms, I call them, are honest, and they've got to be honest, and we've all got to be honest. We're not nasty, we're not vindictive, we're not out to make authors feel dreadful, but we do tell the truth. And if it just isn't working, then you'll find the genius room will say that, and they'll be very straightforward about it. I've totally disengaged, I've lost my attention now, things like that. But if it is working, that's a wonderful thing too, because you can see in real time this groundswell of people going, yeah, this is good. Oh, yeah, I'm with it. Oh, amazing. Yeah, I've got to read on. And that's great. And when that happens, it doesn't always happen, but when it happens, that you've got something really strong there. So we forged a relationship quite recently with a medium-sized publisher here in the UK called Head of Zeus. And every month now we have a winner. And that's the manuscript, the submission that gets the highest score. And that submission goes straight off to Head of Zeus for consideration for publishing. So in our own way, and it's kind of a small way, but in our own way, we are also providing another route to market for aspiring authors. I have a lot of fun doing it. We get lots and lots of great feedback from people. So yeah, I mean, watch the space. I don't know where it's going to go next. We might even do it twice a week, actually. It's totally impossible to do without a big team behind us. We have a huge team, all of them volunteers, all of them people, aspiring authors, all of them too. We've got, I don't know, about a dozen narrators. We've got 2 people who book our guests. We've got several people now who are involved in receiving submissions and queuing up for the show. So it's quite a big operation. It couldn't really be done on a commercial footing, I don't think. But we all get a kick out of it. And hopefully, authors get some good feedback. We get lots and lots of great comments from people who write in, even if they've had negative comments. We don't try to destroy people. If we do say negative things, we try to explain what's going wrong, and maybe sometimes even explain how to fix things. I don't know what's going to happen next, Chris. I don't know. It's just, we're living on the wild, crazy frontier here. I think that's what I mean. It's like you set this podcast, you had this idea, this vision to do it. You didn't know if anyone's going to listen or not, but here you are. You're knocking on 100 episodes, which is brilliant. I think we got to do things like that. We just got to suck it and see. We've got to try stuff. Some of it will work, a lot of it won't. But the thing is, also, and we can get kind of depressed sometimes about reading and writing. We start to think, well, who's going to be reading books anymore? Really, you've got the games, you've got your YouTube, you've got everything else. But I think it comes back to what I was saying right at the beginning, really, about what writers do. And they, even if they're nonfiction, I would argue they are still actually storytellers, because there's a huge amount of story construction in nonfiction. And people, non-writers, love stories. We are hardwired as a species to love stories. We love stories. You look at the news, it's full of stories. PR is obviously full of stories. We love stories. We're hardwired. We, back in the day, we used to sit down around the campfire and the stars were out at night, and the storyteller would enchant us, and we'd all turn into children again. That thing that you do, that you writers do, is an amazing talent. And it's something that the rest of the species is hardwired to want to consume absolutely ad infinitum. We will always want stories. That's very consoling to me, because it's sometimes quite hard to work out where the industry is going and how the hell we're going to make money for writers in the future. But knowing that humans will always want stories in one form or another, the challenge is, I think, now really for people like me, for agents and for publishers, to say, we've got these amazing, brilliant people who create stories. We know there's a huge market for stories there. We've simply got to get the product from A to B and make money out of it. And that's our job. Hopefully we'll do it well. I hope so.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so, with that whole process, there's always, of course, the other side of the coin. There are the people who maybe they don't connect with you on concept. Maybe they don't execute. Maybe they can't execute the idea. So you have to
Yeah,
reject the manuscript.
yeah.
Let's talk about failing forward. How do you encourage people that get their manuscripts rejected to stay on the horse and say, okay, look, yeah, we didn't get anyone to take a bite on
Mm.
this. Here's what needs to happen. Here's where we did well. Here's where we fell short. Like, do you coach them through, or do you give them constructive criticism so that they can come back more encouraged, more strength behind them, and more experience in their corner?
Yeah, I mean, I try very hard not to get things rejected. If I give up with with a project,
Right,
I
right.
mean, I will keep trying. I think we were talking about sort of timeliness. I think sometimes you can go out with projects too soon. Maybe the project's not ready for market. Maybe it needs to be presented in a different way. Maybe it needs a different title. Maybe it's got to be packaged a little bit differently. Maybe you've just got to wait for people to change, for publishers to come and go. They do, especially in bigger publishing companies. People come and go at remarkable speed these days, actually. So I'll keep on knocking on doors until I eventually do get a deal. But the wider question is a tough one, actually. And if you spend a year or more working on the passion of your life, and if you get, well, actually, you don't get rejection much these days. What happens a lot is just nothing, and you sort of you send it off nothing, you send it off nothing, you send it off nothing, and eventually you might get a rejection or two, but actually no one comes back to you, and you think, "Oh, what's going on here?" That's kind of partly what pop-up submissions can do, because if there's a clear and obvious problem with a submission, we can tell you straight away. We can say this is what's going wrong, guys. Just in passing, actually, I mean, one of the things actually is that a lot of writers really don't. I don't know why, but aspiring writers quite often don't actually want to learn the basics. They don't learn the craft, and they're quite happy to spend a year or so writing a manuscript, but they're not prepared to buy. You don't need to go on any courses. You just buy a few cheap books. Get Stephen King's On Writing. Get a few other books like that. Writing, here's a big secret. Writing is mostly tricks. There's a lot of tricks in writing. And here's another secret. A lot of big bestsellers, really big bestsellers, have only got one trick that they do, but they do it really well. So, it's a question of honing your craft. It's a question of sharpening that saw. And you've got to do that. You've got to learn the basics. A lot of stuff I see really is just kind of basically wrong. People got no conception of things like point of view. And it's kind of important. Basic tricks. Learn the basic tricks before you embark on a 100,000 word manuscript. That's kind of the first rule. But looking beyond that, rejection is very hard. I think it's possibly only tougher actually for an actor, because with when when a poor old author's manuscript gets rejected, which it'll get rejected. I mean, every author has got far more rejections than acceptances. When an actor gets rejected, basically, what's they're saying, we don't like you. You're not right for this. It's you. With at least with a manuscript, it's just it's that thing you've spent a year of your life working on. It's very personal. I'm sorry to say that a few times a year I do get really, really horrible, or sometimes really upsetting letters or emails these days, actually, from authors who can't handle it. And I think that's really unfortunate. First thing to remember here is you're going to get lots of rejections. It's part of the course, guys. It is part of the course. So you will get enormous numbers of rejections. That's fine. Second thing to remember is rejections can sometimes be useful. Now, quite often they're not. if you get a form rejection from a publisher saying, unfortunately, we haven't got room for this on our list, blah blah blah. We liked your submission, but we can't find room for it. It means nothing. So there's no useful feedback there at all. But you just mentioned Twitter and so on, and self-critiquing. We got an area in Lutopia for that too. And of course, actually, pop-up submissions is one big live critiquing session, really. So the thing to do, if you can, is to separate your personal ego from the manuscript and listen to what people are saying. And when you do that, the only reaction that's legitimate from you is you listen to someone's criticism, or maybe you read it on a website like Lutopia or somewhere else. The only legitimate reaction is thank you very much. That's all. You don't get into an argument. Rule number one, do not get into an argument with someone who's giving you critique. Their critique might be rubbish. It might be kind of aggressive sometimes. Who knows? It might be anything like that. You are a professional writer. Do not get into an argument with them. Look as dispassionate as you can at whatever criticism they're offering. Then you've got to decide, you've got to take a decision. You've got to say to yourself, is this actually valid? Is there something there? It might be expressed badly. It might be expressed kind of an insulting way. I couldn't care less about that. I'm not interested. I'm just trying to work out if there's anything that's really valid there. Is there something I can take away? And if there is sometimes, is there something I can take away? You say, thank you very much. Delighted to have your reaction to that. You just leave the rest of it on the table. You just take away the useful feedback and you think, okay. So they found the protagonist that I introduced halfway down page 1. They found them impossible to relate to, and they didn't like them at all. Right. Why was that? And that's interesting. That's useful feedback. But you've got to be professional about this, and I think the worst thing in the world is when criticism devastates or destroys authors. That's just inexcusable. That must never happen. We're so keen to make pop-up submissions not like that. We have to be honest, but we even when we're saying something that's pretty serious, we have to do it in a way that's constructive and kind of gives an option for the author, if they choose to take it, which they might not do, gives the author an option to say, yeah, okay, you know what, maybe I need to rethink this.
Oh, that's a great answer. No, I love that. I love the idea of just making sure that the author does stay encouraged. But even when you talked about making sure that the author can divorce ego from work, I think that's such an important thing for authors to
Yeah.
understand. Like from the minute they decide they want to write a book, that this book is not an extension of me; it's a piece of work that I'm working on.
Yeah, exactly.
What's currently on your manuscript wish list? Like, what are some things you're looking for in terms of genre, some authors that you would love to have some submissions?
I've done really well with sort of YA crossover fiction. I would love more YA crossover. I've had a huge success over the past, I don't know, more than a decade now, with a series of books called Wolf Brother. There have been 9 books. The last book in the series is just about to be published. We did a fabulous film rights deal. I would love more books like that transport YA readers, and actually older readers too. When I say crossover, that's what I mean, into not sci-fi, not necessarily even magical worlds, but in this case, the Wolf Brother world was a world set in the Stone Age, and it was dark and mysterious and magical and exciting, and really focused on the survival adventures of two children. And amazingly, as the series progressed, the readers also grew up. So we had, we're getting letters now, lots of letters from readers who discovered the series 10, 12 years ago, and now are fully grown up, and they've got their own children who they're starting to read those books to. I would love to discover another series like that. International success, published all over the world. It's very hard to work out sometimes why these things do work. I remember, actually, it was the Japanese deal. The Japanese deal was I can tell you, it was a 7-figure deal. And I was stunned, actually, that there was so much competition in Japan for this series. And then I started to think to myself, why is it? I thought this is something that, would work okay in the UK market and probably sell American rights and so on. But I couldn't see it working in a society and culture as different as Japan and Korea and other places do. But it did. And I think the reason, and so this is what I'm looking for, okay, I think the reason for the success of that series was that it really took things right back to basics. And it doesn't matter if you're a kid in Tokyo or in Cincinnati or in Birmingham, England, or in the south of France, or Croatia or something. You still can think about what the world was like, thousands of years ago. Very basic, fundamental stuff. it's almost archetypal, I think, in the way that it worked. It kind of transcends national boundaries, it transcends cultural boundaries, it transcends everything. It gets right back to the heart of what it means to be human. Really, really strip things right back to the basics. I would love to discover another series that did that. I think a lot of series these days for children YA are terrific, but they're very escapist. But they do depend on a particular time and a reference point, and they're kind of an extension of where we are now. So they're probably going to work for kids in a fairly sophisticated world and a fairly sophisticated society, but they're not going to work elsewhere. I would love to find a series that just goes right back to the heart of things about what it means to be human, and that would be another universal series that I think just would be so fabulous. If I could find 2 series like that in my lifetime, I would be more than happy.
All right. And so where can authors find you? Online? Where can they get in touch with, Redhammer, get in touch with you?
Well, I'm pretty accessible, actually. I've tried to make myself as accessible as I can do without actually going insane. And I think one of the mistakes that the industry has made in past decades is it's been very, very hard to crack. We've built this big wall around the publishing business, and we don't really want outsiders to get in. That is breaking down quite a lot now, but we've got a long way to go. So I'm actually very accessible. And the way I do it is you can have a look at Redhammer, redhammer.info. You can also come to Lutopia, which is the community I started a long time ago. And what I do, you can join Lutopia for free, and it's a proper membership. You can also pay if you want to. What I do in Lutopia is every Saturday I do a huddle, and this is a virtual thing. Thank heavens for Zoom and so on. And it's just a group of writers who get together 5:00 UK time on Saturday. And the great thing is that it's like Los Angeles. No, I don't mean Los Angeles. It's like Las Vegas. What happens inside a huddle stays inside the huddle. It's like joining the mafia. It's the rule of omerta. You do not discuss other people's works. So you can say anything. And a lot of writers come along. We just talk about stuff. People show works in progress. We talk about titles. We talk about synopses and blurbs and things like that. And I'm there, and I'm there every Saturday. And huddles usually last a couple of hours or so, and they're a lot of fun. I highlight of my weekend really. So that's another way you can find me and pick my brains if you want to, and contribute to other people's solutions for other people's problems too. You can critique their works in progress there too. So if you want to get in direct touch with me, that's perhaps the best way, which is Lutopia, litopia.com.
All right. And then any last minute encouragement for writers and authors who are, on this querying path?
Yeah, obviously, the obvious advice is don't give up. Have, take feedback, take it wherever you can do. Don't be precious or sensitive about it. Do take it. You can always improve. In my experience, and this is a generalization, okay, but it's broadly true for most authors. Most authors really only hit their stride after their that's number sixth book has been properly published. So what it means is that writers are always learning, and your first book gets published and you've had the experience of working with hopefully a good editor, and that's a great experience. And then your second book gets published, and you start to grow a little bit in confidence. Actually, a lot of writing is about confidence, but it's about how confident you feel. When you're an aspiring author, your confidence can be knocked very quickly, very easily. And I think that's one of the reasons we need to, get around and huddle and support each other a bit. So try not to let your self-belief get damaged. Take on board feedback. Hone your craft. Get really good at it. Get unreasonably good at it. There's always room at the top. The interesting thing is that even though publishing seems like a really hard business to crack, the interesting thing is we all want to discover the next bestseller. We are neophiles. We love new things. If I phone up, 10 publishers Monday morning and say, I've got the next big thing. It's an amazing manuscript by an extraordinary new discovery. they are all going to want to know about it. So we do, there is that pull on the other side of the wall. You've just got to try and get over it. And the best way, really, ultimately, to do that is to hone your craft. Just get unreasonably good at it. Practice day in, day out. One of the markers I've found for successful authors is they get up early. They've often got other jobs, arduous jobs sometimes, but they'll get up at 4:30, 5 in the morning. They'll put in an hour or two of work on the manuscript. Then they'll go out and do a day's work. And, people will often do that year in, year out before they finally get their first publishing deal. It's a long haul job. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And the other thing too, actually, Chris, to end on a positive note, is that while, you hear about a lot of young people who have flash in the pan success, actually a lot of writing is about the long distance work you put in. So, I'd say someone in their 40s, 50s is still a young writer. If you are prepared to make a commitment, basically, to improve, develop your craft, hone it, try new things, try and get more meaning out of few words, as that's one of the keys to bestsellerdom, actually, then you will succeed. There's no question about that. You will succeed. It may take some time. You're not going to succeed tomorrow. It might be not next week. It might take another decade. But the good news is that as writers get older, they get more experienced. And, this is a business where age actually doesn't count against you. The older you are, the better you get usually. Unless you fall victim to the demon booze or something, which I strongly suggest you shouldn't do. Writers do quite a lot. So it's all to play for, guys. Don't get disheartened. We need you. We need you to deliver unreasonably good words, and we're ready and waiting for you to do that.
All right. Peter, thank you so much for your time. You have been a wealth of knowledge on this side of the industry. So I appreciate everything you shared today, all the tips, the advice. It's been wonderful.
You're very, very welcome, Chris. It's been great talking to you.
How's that for inspiring? I hope you take action on one thing you learned in today's episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and left a review on iTunes, I want to encourage you to do that too. Finally, be sure to visit chrisjonesinc.com to sign up for updates. Don't worry, I won't spam you. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.